You're listening to Monocle on Saturday, first broadcast on the 30th of November 2024 on Monocle Radio. Hello there, it's Emma Nelson here, coming to you live from Midori House in London. This is Monocle on Saturday, and on today's programme we'll go through the week's news and culture with the journalist and Monocle regular, Yassmin Abdel-Magied. Good morning, Yassmin. What have you spotted?
Well, we'll talk about Australia's social media ban that's just passed this week. We'll also look at the price of coffee that's gone up, and we'll speak about Notre Dame and the new opening.
Thank you very much indeed for that. We'll also get the latest about how to age well in Singapore. That's all coming up on Monocle on Saturday with me, Emma Nelson. Syrian rebels say they've taken control of half of the northern city of Aleppo. It follows a surprise sweep through government-held towns nearly a decade after having been forced out of the city. The US has approved the potential sale of arms to Taiwan worth nearly $400 million. The announcement comes just before the start of the Taiwanese president's sensitive Pacific trip. The US is bound by law to provide Taiwan with the means to defend itself to the constant anger of Beijing. Ukraine's foreign minister has urged NATO to invite Kyiv next week to join the Western military alliance. NATO membership is seen by Kyiv as a key part of a victory plan outlined last month by President Volodymyr Zelensky to end the war triggered by Russia's 2022 invasion. And Ireland's main opposition party, Sinn Féin, is on course to narrowly win the most votes at a general election. Exit polls suggest that Sinn Féin's two major centre-right rivals will likely have enough seats, however, to govern again without it. And that's the news on Monocle Radio. And a very warm welcome to you all. It's just gone, 2 minutes past 9. So we have half an hour of lively conversation, and who better to invite into the studio for that than the Sudanese-Australian broadcaster and author Yassmin Abdel-Magied. Good morning, Yassmin.
Morning.
How are you? How's your week been?
My week been's all right, you know. I'm on the board of the London Library, so we had our AGM this week, which an annual general meeting might not sound exciting, but there were some yells from the floor, as it were. I probably shouldn't speak so indiscreetly about it, but it was quite dramatic because we've got a new building project.
What are the burning issues with London libraries?
Well, the burning issue of the various burning issues are like, where will typography be placed? The classification of different books and where they are in the building. Right. Also, there is a new building project that we're currently telling the members about, and we don't have planning permission just yet. We're just putting the application in, but it's causing quite a lot of drama. May I politely say, amongst the members, because some are really excited about the idea of a members' room and a cafe, and some are very upset about it. So those are the sorts of things that activate the London Library members.
I can see nothing but good when it comes to a cafe. What are the arguments against a cafe? Was it removing the purity of reading?
Well, partly. There is a concern that it might turn into a social club, and that is definitely not what's going to happen. I mean, I must reassure all members that might be listening that it is not going to be turned into a social club by any means. It is ultimately still a library, and we have, a million titles, a million books. So the primary purpose will always be to read, but it is just a place where you might be able to buy a coffee, potentially, if we decide to go down this path, and you can sort of talk at the same time.
There was a massive threat to London's libraries must be about 10, 15 years ago now, when this was one of the things that was subject to the great scythe when austerity kicked in. And London lost loads and loads of libraries. I mean, how do you make sure that, frankly, I would say that the cafe would sort of keep its heart beating a little longer, but I'm not on the board, thankfully. But the idea of keeping libraries relevant and keeping them sort of sharp, what are the strategies behind it?
Well, I'm really proud to be part of the library and part of the sort of, because we are actually just looking at the strategy going forward. And the cafe, even though that was one of the major themes of the AGM, really what the project is about, we've got a discovery room or sort of an outreach room that's being built. We're looking at, refreshing the collection. And it is it is the home of literary inspiration, or certainly that's what our aim and objective is to be a place where you can continue. I mean, it's a 185-year-old institution, and it's a place where the authors of Dracula and Sherlock Holmes and Virginia Woolf, all of these people have sat in the London Library and actually written these books. So part of it is about maintaining that history, but also thinking about what it could look like in the future. How do we continue to bring new people in? How do we continue to inspire writers and readers alike? So what happens with the cafe remains to be seen, but certainly it gave us a lot to discuss at the AGM.
And it's an amazing place. I mean, I'm just looking it up now, that it's, frequent borrowers.
Oh, yeah.
Borrowers?
Yeah.
Charles Dickens.
Oh, yeah.
Charles
yeah.
Darwin.
Mm-hmm.
Bram Stoker.
A lot of the OGs, as it were.
Absolutely. Virginia Woolf, Angela Carter, Daphne du Maurier, Stanley Kubrick, Ian Fleming. Current writers in membership.
Mm-hmm.
Kazuo Ishiguro, Raymond Antrobus, Simon Sharma, Jessie Burton and Sarah Waters. President, Helena Bonham Carter.
Correct.
Goodness me. Do you have to get the cafe past all those? Do you have to get the cafe past Helena Bonham Carter?
I'm sure. Look, I'm not sure if Helena has an opinion on this, but she will definitely be invited and always have, her own spot in the corner. If she feels like she wants a quiet spot at St. James's Square during a busy day.
I think we're all going to come down here. Do you work down there? Or
I do quite a lot, yeah. So because, it is a beautiful building and right in the sort of centre of London, beautiful light right next to St. James's Park. And so when I'm having a London Library Day, I like to come in as early as possible, secure my favourite seat where it's kind of looking out over the square, and get writing away.
Wonderful. I shall try and apply for membership as well.
Yes, do it.
I want to join the ranks of Charles Dickens, Virginia Woolf and Simon Sharma. Right, okay, well, with that minor diversion, I'm glad you had a good week sorting out the future of one of London's most beautiful and loved buildings and literary establishments. While you were in the library, I'm assuming you did lots of reading, and you were doing lots and lots of reading of the papers.
Correct. So the first story that caught my attention, and I've been keeping an eye on it actually, because it's happening in the place that I grew up, Australia, and so they've recently passed the online safety bill, which is essentially they rushed it through, and this is kind of one of the critiques, but it is a ban of social media for anyone under the age of 16. And the question of how this is going to be operationalized is still, up for discussion. But ultimately, what the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, was arguing, or has argued, is that young people, he has argued there's a causal link between social media and harms to young people. And thus, nobody under the age of 16 should have access to it. And it comes into operation in about 12 months. However, despite the passing of this bill, there are still a lot of questions, because even though this might be something that, parents have pushed for, and he sort of said, parents really want this and we think it's really important to protect young people, quite a lot of young people don't necessarily think this is going to be effective. Quite a lot of experts and also academics and so on are saying a ban isn't necessarily the solution to the harms that young people are facing online. And in fact, the question of how you're going to be able to decide or define or authenticate the age of people on various social media platforms. And it's not even certain which platforms are going to be counted. It is, yes, X/Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc. But will it include YouTube? At the moment, they're saying no because of educational purposes. But, it's not as if there aren't online harms through YouTube. And so it's really interesting, because for me, it's a case of a country like Australia trying to do something progressive or something that challenges and pushes back against...
That protects people.
Exactly, that protects people. However, it feels like an incredibly blunt instrument.
The interesting thing that I found with this one is that it has passed... It went through the lower house and the upper house with absolutely no problem at all. There was no pushback against this. And that, to me, suggested that obviously Australia is sort of seizing the bit between its teeth, which is, you've got to applaud it for its bravery and its courage. But at the same time, it sort of suggested that actually there is a wider problem that society is trying to address, and that the Australians are really having a go at it, given the fact that no one said that this was a bad idea.
And this is the interesting thing, isn't it? It might be the case that a causal link between social media and harms for young people hasn't necessarily been foolproofly established. However, I think generally there's an acceptance that there is harm being caused. Young people are facing and continue, whether it's like cyberbullying, whether it's exposure to, whether it's the mental health outcomes that time and time again we have seen reported, from these companies themselves. So it is interesting that people do think that something should happen, there's, I guess, a question, and it's a philosophical question, is doing something better than doing nothing at all, right? And is it possible that the something can be worse? I mean, ultimately, as a young person, I'm pretty sure people are going to find ways around it. So it's almost a question of, will this be cosmetic? I mean, they are saying that there will be massive fines, up to $50 million fines for companies that are seen to allow people under the age of 16 to be on the platform. But again, how will this happen? It's uncertain.
We were just chuckling about this, about LinkedIn. Wondering whether LinkedIn is not part of the ban. I think we mentioned this on the radio earlier on this week. That are we now going to see a bunch of 14-year-olds like jumping onto LinkedIn and
being looking for work, looking for opportunities,
selling trainers, posting odd jobs,
entrepreneur,
doing
Listen, it's quite
stuff.
possible.
I mean, it'd be much more interesting because the number of things that rock up on my LinkedIn feed about, I am delighted to have attended this very boring conference where we're standing in a line. There might have been a flag, usually not a flag, and you just think, well done you for doing something. I would be quite up for LinkedIn to be taken over by 10-year-olds. To see what they can do.
Your wish might be actually granted here. LinkedIn is actually becoming, I have heard LinkedIn is becoming the new place to be. I've heard of people being asked out on dates.
Sorry, LinkedIn, you're brilliant.
Yeah,
I love you. You get me... You connect me to the world.
My husband's opportunities have actually come through LinkedIn, like both of his jobs. So it actually does work in that respect. But also, I know people that have been asked out on dates successfully.
What?
On LinkedIn. Yeah, I'm telling you, it is the place to be. We're getting a nod from the producer. Look.
What is it? So, hang on a minute. We're going to have to talk about the LinkedIn thing. How you actually get lucky on LinkedIn.
On LinkedIn.
How many conferences do you have to go to in order to find... someone looks at you and just goes, you look great on that lineup.
No, they're
on
looking
that
at
slightly elevated stage.
Your job history, and they're like, this is a person with stable... I don't know.
Prospects.
Exactly. You have a future. Let me ask you out. Maybe. I don't...
Seriously, can you imagine?
I'm really enjoying the look of incredulity that you've got here in the studio.
I'm absolute. So it's either going to be 10-year-olds or like the new. It's going to be Tinder.
It's
Tinder for the suited.
It might be already happening. This might be what is currently going on.
So imagine you had a LinkedIn date, right? So you'd be sitting there, and I'd imagine that someone would sit there and for 10 minutes would give you a list of bullet points of their achievements.
Well, they would be like, here is why.
Open to work.
Yes, I'm open to work. Here are my attributes. This is my
handsome.
experience. Yeah, precisely. These are the things that I've done in the past.
Clean.
There you go. I mean, all the important things. Hygiene is quite up there, in the little...
Usually, yes.
One would hope. Wow. Okay, so should I swiftly move for so long? Do we want to talk about the next story? Well, you noticed something in Le Monde about... Yeah. Let's do this one.
It's the story. While you're finding it, Yassmin is whizzing through her iPad and pulling things up. It's a very, very interesting story. It's on the front page, actually, the Le Monde's website. About Jordan Bardella and his book signing. So Jordan Bardella is the leader of the Rassemblement National, the far-right party, which narrowly misses out on seizing large amounts of power. And it's one of those things that absolutely at the last minute the French hold their nose and say no. But it's getting more and more traction. And this article is about a tour that Jordan Bardella, the leader, is he's doing a book tour. He's just published a book called Ce que je cherche, what I'm looking for, what I'm seeking. And the line is, it looks like he's like an influencer. This idea that he has a calmness, a reassuring way about him. He's charming. He's young. He'd do very well on LinkedIn. But this whole idea that he's charming the south of France with this amazing sort of very, very clever campaign.
Well, what I thought when I was looking at this article was that we are looking at the way that politics is changing. Like if we consider what has just happened in the US election, you could argue that Trump coming from reality television and so on and kind of moving into online spaces in the way that he has, Elon Musk, even though these people all have sort of traditional and legacy origins, they do operate in ways that are akin to being influencers. And also the power, the sort of media power, the Joe Rogans, the so on that people talk about, the reach that they have. And I think the way that media operates in politics, or the relationship between sort of legacy media, new social media, and politics is really evolving. So it's very interesting to see it come to France, especially because the regulation, or the expectation, or the ways in which we have an understanding of what can and can't be talked. Like, there are rules essentially for traditional broadcasts, and there are no rules for sort of new broadcasts or new media and so on. And so if you're trying to sort of connect to audiences more directly, which is what audiences and voters are kind of looking for, because one of the things that is often talked about is honesty, transparency, people saying things like, he says what he means, and so on, as things that they want. It is interesting when somebody who has traditional political charm and traditional political, you're just showing me now, Emma, like this line of people that are lining up for his book tour.
It's in the hundreds, and everybody is, and it ranges for all kinds of ages, all kinds of backgrounds as well. It's a very, very clever campaign that they're launching, and some of the people that they're interviewing are the descendants of Corsicans, of Moroccans, and of Algerians, who ordinarily in the world of the National Front would be the absolute target of people like the Rassemblement National.
And not to sort of draw too much of a parallel between the two countries, but I do think that we're looking at a broader trend of, we assume, and I say it's sort of a broad we, there is an assumption that, somebody's identity or somebody's, migration history or whatever will define their politics. But as we are seeing, that is falling apart, right? And then you get someone like Jordan Bardella, who, is charming, is inspiring, is saying things that, because ultimately people want to believe in something. And so he's giving them something coherent and warm and reassuring to believe in.
And he's relevant. He's walked the walk. He's not from a wealthy upbringing. He didn't enjoy privilege as a child, and so he can turn around and say, "I get you," because a lot of the people in these queues are people who are. You're reading a quote here. "I thought we were in the middle class. I don't know how the people down below do it. Not been on vacation for 4 years. The reality of life for people who can't make it through the month." This genuine sense of deprivation that is being felt in France.
And I think that has to be paid attention to, right? I think this is part of the challenge, is that it sometimes can feel like the conversations conversations from the traditional progressive parties lack an honesty, because people are saying, well, you're telling me that I have everything that I need, but I feel deprived. And actually, maybe my real standard of living has decreased over the last 10, 15 years. And so when you're telling them that you're actually fine, but they don't feel fine, that gap is where people like Jordan Bardella are stepping in.
Okay, let's move to a story that's actually dominating all the newspapers today, which is there was an historic vote in the United Kingdom in the lower house yesterday, in the House of Commons, to do with assisted dying. The United Kingdom being probably at the forefront of this. Other countries have gone before, but to have something like the UK go for assisted dying, it was a pretty convincing vote. People went for it. And the reaction across the papers has been, it depends on what your politics is. The left-wing Guardian is saying, okay, this is the start of a new beginning. People whose loved ones have suffered terribly in their last days, or people who are suffering, are saying this is what we need. You take control of your final days. Yet many other papers are saying, campaigners who desperately believe that this should not happen are saying this is just the beginning of the fight.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? So as you say, it passed its second reading with a vote of 330 to 275. So it's a significant number. And also, this was a free vote, so members could kind of vote how they wish. It wasn't kind of like toe the party line. And what this meant was you saw people standing up, you saw MPs standing up in Parliament and really arguing the case, arguing their side. And also, what I found fascinating is in the lead-up, many members of Parliament talking about their distress or their uncertainty, really genuinely, about which position to take, because it is quite emotive, it's quite complex. You do have one side that is saying that ultimately what's happening at the moment is people are left to, they are already on the brink of dying, and you want to give them dignity and the ability to choose how they're going to sort of finish their life. On the other hand, you have campaigners and so on saying, well, actually what this is going to do is open the door to abuse. You're going to see all sorts of people, family members pushing their loved ones into an early grave in order to get the inheritance, whatever it may be. And these are, we are talking life and death. And so what we're going to see now, the bill hasn't passed completely. It's passed its second reading, and so it will go through further interrogation, undergo perhaps amendments, and this is where we'll see where the Labour backbencher, one of the Labour backbenchers, Kim Leadbeater, who is saying that she'll now focus on making the bill as best as it possibly can be, and what that looks like will be interesting, because also I think many countries around the world, there aren't that many places around the world that have assisted dying. So this is, I think, a discussion and a debate that is being looked at around the world, especially in a Western context where we have an aging population, where more and more people will live longer and will want to make choices about the way that they go, as it were. And also it's about the families. What does it look like for family members? And many supporters of the bill have also been family members who said the lack of dignity that my loved one went through. Like, I want to be able to support them in the choice. I don't want to be prosecuted for helping my family member, who is in deep pain and so on. So it is really, and I actually, despite hearing all these different debates, I still don't personally know what
you never
I
know
think.
until you get there.
Well, yeah.
And I think this might be the problem that the Labour Party will face. I mean, it would be probably churlish to make a direct comparison to Brexit, but in terms of the effect that the Brexit vote had on British society, it divided people deeply, and it is still unresolved. And one wonders whether so early in its term for the Labour government to grasp this particular nettle, which will divide people so personally, and people will not move on this one. I wonder what will happen to the Labour Party's political fortunes and indeed society again. I just thought, okay, this is obviously a government trying to change things and trying to address some big problems. But is this something that the United Kingdom needs right now, to be chopped into two?
It's interesting because as you were talking, I thought, yes, there is an analogy with Brexit. But the thing about this is that, as you say, it is deeply personal. This is not necessarily something that you can sway people on in the way that you might have been able to rationally or emotionally sway people on Brexit, right? It is not a political choice. It like you might argue it's a philosophical or an ethical or a moral. This is the realm of philosophy and ethics and morals and so on, and what you think about life and so on. And so while there might be this deep division, part of me thinks that there is a bit more grace and compassion actually across the aisle with respect to this issue, because people ultimately both want what's best.
There's also the issue that at the moment care here in the United Kingdom, we'll go to Singapore in a moment actually to find out how they're doing it for the elderly, but care for the elderly is in major crisis. Anybody who's had to look after an elderly parent knows full well that it is a brutal scrap to try and get the slightest thing. Palliative care doctors have come out this morning saying, right, we need to rethink this. And actually there's the philosophical side sometimes is being pushed out of is sometimes overtaking something which actually is a practical problem for the United Kingdom, that arguably people would prefer to keep living if that quality of life was better.
Yeah.
And so that the palliative care was good, and that the not because there isn't a tremendous amount of goodwill, but organisational issues, funding the lot.
Yeah.
And you think, actually, are we now trying to? I don't know what that adds to the argument.
Well, I mean, it begs the question, if they're, as you say, if people's choices were a really rough kind of last 5 to 10 years versus a really good 5 to 10 years where your quality of care was higher, well, maybe that's a much easier choice. But right now it's like a really rough 5 to 10 years, or choosing to, bow out at the time that you want to. And I'm using all sorts of kind of odd euphemisms here, but ultimately, it is that kind of emotive, and also it is I don't think that we have many examples yet of societies that have been able to respond to the aging population with in a way that we can kind of look to as an example. I mean, somebody was telling me a story recently about, I think, a visit to Japan where all the primary schools had been turned into elderly care homes. And you're seeing this massive demographic shift, and we will continue to face that demographic shift. And the group of the population that will be working in order to sort of provide the tax-paying base, as it were, is shrinking when we know that people are having fewer kids and so on. And so if it is not the case that we can guarantee that people's quality of life in the last decade or so or more will be livable, will be dignified, then maybe this option should be something we look at.
Let's look at how they're doing it in Singapore at the moment, because housing a rapidly aging population is particularly urgent in Singapore. Those aged 65 and above are projected, the number of those aged 65 and above are projected to rise from 1/5 to 1/4 of the total population in the next 5 years. Most Singaporeans live in public housing, so the city is now presenting a unique opportunity for adaptation for the older generation to be done right. And Monocle's contributor Adam Hancock has been out to explore some of the work being done to address this.
I'm walking around a housing estate here in central Singapore, and it's not hard to see that this country has an ageing population. To put it quite simply, I can see a lot of old people. Now, most of these elderly people live in tower blocks known as HDBs. They provide affordable public housing for Singaporeans, and I'm looking up at one right now, and I can see lots of washing lines that are hanging out of the many windows above me. Now, whilst this is a good housing solution for a city like Singapore with limited space, living in big apartment blocks can make socialising with neighbours pretty tough. It's certainly a change from the Singapore of old, which was made up of small villages known as kampungs. Their houses were built on stilts for ventilation, with open verandas to encourage a sense of community, with neighbours talking to each other on a daily basis. Families relied on wells for water and often raised chickens and grew their own fruit trees and vegetables. But with the demise of kampungs, there is now just one left in the country, and the increase in high-rises, many Singaporeans feel this so-called kampung spirit has been lost. In fact, a recent study found about 40% of the elderly feel lonely here, with researchers saying it's an overlooked public health challenge in this ageing country. But a new project called Kampung Admiralty could bring some of that sense of community back. To find out more about this new model for housing Singapore's elderly population, I've been to the offices of Woha, a local architectural firm.
I'm Pearl Chi, one of the directors of Woha Architects, and I'm also the project leader for Kampung Admiralty.
I've been reading a little bit about Kampung Admiralty. Are you able just to describe a little bit about what the problem was, first of all, and how you went about trying to solve it through your work as a designer?
Kampung Admiralty actually look at a few issues that everyone faces globally. So it's about communities, family nuclear becomes smaller and smaller, and how do we avoid isolation in a housing estate? The apartments for the seniors are quite isolated as a single block, a standalone block. So they can easily be isolated in their homes. But the project looked at how to integrate these flats. And it also talked about how to help seniors to age in place or to be active as they age in place. We always think of taking care of them when they are sick or they are quite old. But the project looks at what happened before that. How do we keep them active and how do we enable them to be independent and age actively?
So how did you go about trying to solve this problem? What designs did you put in place at this project?
So 7 agencies came together to co-locate a healthcare, public housing and social facilities. And we wanted to inject a lot of public space and green spaces into the building so that the community is enhanced, the elderly have outdoor spaces and they are socially connected. And they also have facilities at their doorstep. So these are ways to avoid any isolation or alienation as they stay in their own apartments. Yeah.
And has it been successful so far?
Very successful. The public space, it is becoming the heart of the community actually. The government is also wanting to kind of duplicate. Of course, this is one of the models. I believe the government agency in Singapore are looking at various kind of home assistant models or public housing models to tackle the elderlies, but this is definitely one of the very effective ways of integrating public flats for elderly inside this building.
Well, one place that is the heart of the community for many elderly Singaporeans is the coffee shop. I'm at one now, and there are plenty of old men and women here, or aunties and uncles as they are affectionately known. Now, despite it being pretty busy here today, I can see a lot of uncles just sitting by themselves. Some are reading the paper or looking at their phones, whilst others are just staring into space. And it is largely older men that hang out in these places, rather than visiting one of the many active ageing centres that have been set up across the island. So to check in on these uncles, one local organisation has designed a unique programme to connect with Singapore's ageing population. I went to meet Wendy Chua, who co-founded local design studio Forest in Wales, and has been working on this project with the Liam Foundation.
These coffee shops, which they call Kopitiam here, right? What is the culture of these places?
So you can think about the coffee shops as like the communal kitchen for our housing blocks. So for some seniors who live alone now, they might not be cooking anymore, right? So they settle their meals. They have their 2 or 3 meals a day at the coffee shops downstairs. And that's where they hang out. That's where they have their coffee. So in this project that we're doing, primarily we're looking at elder isolation. So how do we get them out? And how do we connect with them in what we call the pre-loneliness phase, before they are isolated at home because of disabilities? And so it's really important that we are engaging with them in these community spaces where if they don't hang out at a coffee shop for maybe 1 day or 2, somebody in the coffee shop is going to get worried.
When you go into one of these coffee shops, how are you approaching these men and what are you saying to them and what sort of work are you doing with them?
If you were to go into this coffee shop and start, bring out your clipboard and your notepad and your pencil, you're going to scare them away. So what we've created is a method called life story ethnography. And one person will be interviewing and one person will be doing a caricature sketch of the elder, and we find out more about their life and we try to sketch their life story into that sketch.
And we have some photographs here of the project underway. I can see here Mr. Huang, who I believe is 90 years old, and he is drawing their painting even at a table. So can you just tell me a little bit more about him?
He hangs out at this table in a coffee shop at the same time every day. It's his only exercise, just walking out to this table and sitting down. He doesn't like the centers, the community centers, because he finds it too noisy. And we found out later that he was a Qigong master. He was a calligraphy master. And so when we did the life story sketch with him, we asked him to pick up the brush and write his name on it. And over time, we thought, let's do calligraphy sessions with him. Let's engage him to write calligraphy and gift it to the communities. And he would just sit there and he would write the scrolls, and different neighbors from the community would come by.
I mean, it looks like in the photos I'm seeing here that he's having a good time. He seems to be enjoying himself. Are you seeing a lot of success with this project?
Yes, definitely. I mean, in the first place, to have younger people, with the student volunteers, being interested in their life is already something that brings a lot of pride to them, that somebody actually thinks my story is important. And then to be able to connect them with a community, and these are neighbors who might have walked by him every day but may not have known about him or may not know that he has this skill. And after that gifting of a calligraphy, they are going to say hello to him every time they see him now, so he's going to be more socially connected.
By 2030, Singapore is projected to have 1 in 4 of its citizens aged 65 or over. And it's certainly not alone. With humans living longer and birth rates declining, many societies around the world are going to need to think about how to deal with ageing populations. The work being done here to design a better world for our senior citizens could one day be the blueprint for coping with super-age societies. For Monocle in Singapore, I'm Adam Hancock.
Thank you for that, Adam. Yassmin, I love Mr. Huang, who's 90. He does his calligraphy. And there was a really lovely sense of dignity to that piece from Adam.
I mean, it is inspiring, isn't it, when you hear stories of folks that are living like full lives at that age. And, I have friends and whose grandparents sort of are in their 90s and still very active. And I do find that inspiring, and it's the kind of thing that one hopes, if all going well, inshallah, that you get to that age and you're still fit and healthy and you're still able to kind of live a full life. And also the thing that I really liked about that story was that sort of intergenerational relationships, and the fact that we know that one of the things that age people is loneliness and isolation and so on. And so finding ways, projects that bring people together. I mean, the old intergenerational household used to do that. In Sudan, where my family's from, my grandma, when she lived in the house, she sort of sat in the main room, and that was her domain. And so she was the center of everything. But that's not how we design buildings. That's not how we design households. That's not how we live so much anymore. And so finding other ways for people to sort of be part of the fabric of a family is so important.
I always find cities are very, very good at that. That the idea of always when you go a bit older, you move out to the country and you have a quiet life. That's arguably the last thing you need, because that wonderful thing of being in a big city such as Singapore or as London is that you can meet people who are in their 80s and in their 20s who absolutely have shared love of exchanging ideas and curiosity for life, and then everybody learns from everybody else, and ageism just sort of gets removed in many ways.
And not to bring up the London Library again, but one of my favourite things is that you have members that are,
they've got a coffee shop in Singapore.
Exactly. You sort of have members you have members in their 80s and members in their 20s kind of sitting next to each other, and when they want to talk, they're engaging with each other and they're part of the same community. And that it is, for me, one of the few kind of places, or finding places where you can have that proper intergenerational conversation and relationship is beautiful.
That respect for other people. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me in the studio, Yassmin Abdel-Majid. Thanks also to our producer, Desiree Bandley, and our studio engineer, Flynn Simons. And that's all the time we have for Monocle on Saturday. I'll be back tomorrow with Monocle on Sunday. That'll be also live from Zurich. Our editorial director, Tyler Brûlé, will be at the helm. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you so much for listening.